Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Every Day is Saturday. I'm your host, Brad Gatto, and I'm missing my normal co-host, Mr. Matt Stahl, with me here today, but that's because I have a special guest with me today. Miss Natalie Morland is here with us today. I'll introduce you more in just a second. But the reason Natalie is with us is because we're doing an episode today on long-term care, or really just kind of healthcare at the end of life or nearing the end of life, which maybe for some of you sounds like a boring topic. Others of you might be like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what I want. But at the end of the day, we all have to deal with this because unfortunately, I hate to be the bearer of bad news at the beginning of a podcast episode, we're all going to die. And at the end of life, in 99.9% of cases, we need some care. And this is just a highly complex topic. So it's not something that I have dealt with day to day like Natalie has. So I wanted an expert to come in with me. So I booted Matt. We don't have Matt today, but I've got Natalie with me. And Natalie, thank you for joining us on the podcast today. I appreciate it.
Privilege. Thank you for having me.
So just a quick introduction, Natalie. So you didn't grow up in the state of Minnesota. You grew up in North Dakota. We won't hold that against you. That's fine. But you've been in healthcare for your entire career. Started off as a nurse, correct? But have now been in kind of the senior care world for the last 25, 26, 27 years.
That's correct. Yeah.
It's easy to lose track. And I knew you wouldn't give me an exact number because, as we get older, people don't like to give away exact dates and ages and stuff like that. So I won't hold you to exactly how many years, but for quite some time.
That's correct.
And now over the last handful of years, you actually own, operate, and run a memory care facility in the Twin Cities here down in Excelsior.
That's correct. Yeah.
Can you talk to us a little bit about that, about the facility?
So our community is called Trouvaille. It means a special hidden find. And
a special hidden find?
It is.
In what language?
It is French.
Okay.
Yes.
I should have known that. By the way that it's spelled and the way that you say it. Gosh, I thought about it for a second.
Most people don't know how to say it or spell it. So it wasn't probably a strong marketing move, but we liked what the word is. So, yeah.
So run and operate. Talk to us a little bit about what Trouvaille is, because there are a lot of different types of, assisted living care facilities, stuff like that. So what specifically is your niche there at Trouvaille?
Yeah, so our niche is really that we provide memory care, and we are licensed as an assisted living with dementia care license. So our population who live there vary with their degree of memory loss. Some are just mild cognitive impairment all the way through end of life care. So that's what our specialty is. All of our staff that work there, that is what they come to work to do. And so we're super blessed to have that be our community. And it's just truly an honor to serve residents at this point in their life.
Yeah, that's awesome. So with this extensive background of being in this kind of senior care world for the last 26, 27-ish years, something like that. The reason I wanted to have you on is because obviously you have a unique view into watching families navigate kind of this phase of life. And I think everybody would agree it's complex, it's confusing, and at the end of the day, it trips a lot of people up. And, as a financial advisor, we see families go through this more from a distance than you would. But it hit home for me personally a handful of years ago when my wife's grandmother passed away. She had a medical event, was living at home and fairly healthy, and had a medical event where we thought we were going to lose her. She did not have a healthcare directive. And so in that moment in the hospital, there was no directive from her of how she wanted care. So the family had to make those decisions. And of course, like most family would, it's anything at all costs, because, when moms, how do you make any other decision than try to save mom? And unfortunately, the good news is she lived. The unfortunate part is the rest of her life was in a long-term care facility with really no quality of life. And so 6 years of navigating that, the financial aspect of that, trying to save the family farm. This stuff's just super important, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at. And you have far more expertise in this than most. And so where I want to start is just talking through the range of opportunities out there, right? Because on a 0, on a scale of 1 to 10, you're living at home and you're completely self-sufficient. But then the second you get to a 1, which maybe just means I need a little bit of help from day to day, or maybe even just a couple of days a week, all the way to the 10, which is like my wife's grandmother, which full care, right? Needs care pretty much every second of every day. Can you talk to me a little bit about the spectrum of like the options that are out there and the type of care that is out there for people to participate in?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. This is a super complicated journey for people. And I think that it's something that we don't tend to think about until we have to think about it. And that makes it even more complicated as you have family members with varying views. And when you don't have clear understanding of where people are at or what their wishes are, it kind of adds more burden onto the circumstance as it is. But there are a variety of different things that are options for people, and it can vary depending on what your care needs are, but it also can vary depending on your resources and your desires of what's super important for people. So you're right, there's independent living as far as people living independently in their home. And what is usually the case is those individuals, they would say to you, I've lived here for 50 years and I'm not going anywhere. And so there's children of those adults that struggle to say, we can't have them move anywhere. This is where they want to be. And sometimes that's an option and sometimes it's not.
I'm just laughing because we all know somebody that has said that. Like whether it's your mom, your grandma, or your spouse, maybe there's no possible way you're moving me out of this house.
Oh, absolutely. And it doesn't matter that they are struggling and they can't mow the lawn and they can't do the things that they love to do in their house.
Yeah.
And I frequently tell families of seniors to say, those memories are not stuck within the cement of that house. They actually do go with you wherever you go. But that's a really
good line.
It's a really hard thing for people to navigate. So there's that. And oftentimes you're going to come across, even in that setting, seniors who are going to say, I don't want help. Even if they need help, they don't want help, which is another challenge that you have. But there is the ability to bring services into people's home, and that can look very much a variety of different ways. Sometimes they'll go to the doctor or have had a medical event, and then they'll be eligible for some Medicare home care services on a temporary basis to kind of get them stabilized. Or some people have PCA or caregivers that come into their home to provide that care, or a family member is providing that care. So it can look a variety of different ways. Some people pay up to $30,000 a month in home care just at their home to keep their loved ones in their house. So I hear all kinds of different ranges just on that aspect of alone of keeping people in their house.
Yeah.
Now, and even with that, there's going to be pluses and there's going to be drawbacks with that. But then at some point, sometimes people end up needing care levels where you're going to have nurses or care staff that are available to those individuals at a more frequent basis. And so sometimes people move into what's an independent senior living building, and that oftentimes is just the ability to try to get rid of the things like mowing the lawn or doing yard service or cooking and cleaning, things that they are just hard to do on a day-to-day basis. And you can bring services into that setting too. And then there comes assisted living. And assisted living, I always try to explain to families, the best way to explain that is that your services are based on a schedule. Because I think most people, when they need care, families will tend to say, well, they just need assisted living. And that may be the case. But if they have memory deficits and things that care that needs to be anticipated, not just like I need to go to the bathroom at 7 a.m. There's a lot of things to navigate even in that setting, but there's assisted living. And then there is assisted living with memory care is another licensure. So that includes a secured memory care unit or community, such as...
So when you say licensure, you're talking about the facility itself has to have a special license to add memory care to that definition.
Correct. Yes. Each of those are, and in the assisted living world, the licensures are regulated by the state of Minnesota. So they're not regulated by the federal government. They are regulated by the state.
Is that true of all 50 states? Like they all have their own kind of set of rules and regs around this?
Yep. So, and every state is different of how assisted living works. So they're not the same. You can't go from Minnesota and go to Iowa and have the same kind of concept. So prior in my career, I worked in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Iowa and North Dakota, and I had very different people would experience assisted living very different in each of those states. But
interesting. And so then after assisted living, there's still another.
Yep. And then there's skilled nursing facility. And sometimes people go to a skilled nursing facility, also called a nursing home.
It's like a swear word. Yeah.
Yeah. And they might be there for transitional care or short-term rehab after a hospital stay. And others stay there long-term. And usually in a nursing home, there's a degree of care. So there might be memory care being provided there, which is an alternative to an assisted living.
Yep.
Or they might have just long-term care floors where they are just receiving residential care, but for the remainder of that time.
Yeah. So long story short, one of the things that the listeners should get out of this is, regardless of kind of where you stand from, I just need a little bit of help doing something once a day, or I want to stay in my home versus I'm going to move to a facility that's more geared towards this, all the way down the line to I need full-term skilled care. There's just a lot more options today than there used to be.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And I think the defining factor has a lot to do with resources, but it also has a lot to do with choice.
Yeah.
And so you kind of have a lot of things to navigate as you make those decisions, but there are some choices that people tend to make that maybe aren't the best decisions for a long-term vision. I would say as seniors, once you get into those older years, it's difficult to move multiple times.
Yeah.
And so that's something to always keep in mind, that once you make a move, sometimes you don't want to make 3 moves, and families will soon find that it's difficult to do it one time, but it's more difficult to do it 2 or 3 times.
Let's caveat into that for just a second, because I don't want to lose that, because it's a really good point. So with that being the case, what is something they can do to prevent? So when you talk about building that vision, like what's a practical thing that they can think through, or questions they should be asking themselves, or things they should be thinking about that would allow them to, once they need care, not have to move 3 times? Like, what are some of the things you're talking about there?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is to really kind of spend time as a family, or whoever is important in your life, to really think about what your values are and what's important to you as you make a decision. Mm-hmm. Because some people really, want the frills of a large apartment and what that looks like, or just the area that you live in or want to live in and that kind of thing. But additionally, I think as you navigate that, there's so many different factors that play into what's available at the time of your need. And so that part of being proactive and kind of thinking through those differentiations are really important to kind of know what your desire is, because when you get to a community, there are going to be some stopgaps where somebody, like in assisted living, they will say, if you have some memory deficits where you might wander out or get confused or go to another room, you can't live there any longer. And so then that decision oftentimes is a pretty abrupt decision that needs to be made about another move.
Yeah. So is it fair to say then, as an example of what you're talking about, that there are assisted care facilities that, to your point, once you have memory loss, you have to move because they're not licensed to do that, but there are other ones that are. And so that would allow for a longer runway for you to possibly be able to stay at that facility if that were to happen?
Yeah, and I think the hard thing for people navigating this is the license in and of itself allows for a variety. So in Minnesota specifically, you could be on a ventilator and still be in assisted living. There are assisted livings licensed for that level of care, but other assisted livings might have a very mild, light assisted living offering, and they're still under a licensure similar to that. So the bottom line is there's a great variability, and so it is hard to navigate. And so the rules in Minnesota require you to basically disclose what it is that you do and don't do. But when somebody's in the position of touring places and trying to make those decisions, not all the time are they looking so forward out that they're paying attention. The other limitation that can happen, what can cause somebody to have to move, is related to finances. Yeah. Not all places will say you can stay here for the endurance just due to finances. They would say some places might say you can stay here private pay until your resources run out, and then you'd have to move. So those are all things that you have to take into consideration depending on your
And the opposite to that would be you can stay here past private pay because we'll take government pay.
Correct.
Right.
Some places will do that and others will not.
Yeah. So really important questions to ask yourself and also ask the facilities is be very specific about the type of licensure that they have and get a really good understanding of what might cause you to have to move either on their part because they don't have the licensure to take care of you or even on your part because you don't have the resources and maybe they're not set up or they just choose not to take government funding.
Correct. Yeah. I think it's important to ask, like I said, those future questions and really come up with kind of those factors that either you're okay with that or you're not okay with that. And then that really helps guide sort of as how you make your decisions going forward.
Yeah. We talked a little bit offline before, as we were kind of prepping for this episode about kind of the state of long-term care, not just like the options, which we just got finished discussing, but you just brought up a point as we were kind of talking about different types of facilities and how expensive it can be. And you made a comment kind of in passing about how long-term care facilities, which can be really expensive, tend to struggle financially. And it kind of caught me off guard because I was like, what do you mean? They're so expensive. How could they possibly be struggling? But it just made me think about kind of the state of care. And I'm just curious with all the experience you have, and you also do consulting for other facilities, like where do you think the state of care is going? Like, and I'm putting you on the spot because I didn't prep you for this question, but it just seems to me like the need's not going down, it's going up. The numbers around like memory care are skyrocketing. The options have gone up, but there's still kind of this big state of lack of education in the space of what's out there for options, how to prepare for those options, how to financially fund those options. But then also, I mean, your comment to me about long-term care struggling financially, like these skilled care facilities. I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts are about where the industry might be headed. I'm not going to hold you to this.
Yeah. Oh, well, I mean, an optimist would say that we would hope that some awareness about this would change the trajectory, because that's really, in the 25 plus years I've been doing this, I've always been hopeful that there would be a greater awareness about the need and the respect given to seniors about really the investment as a society into the care of seniors, because it hasn't always felt that way. And the pandemic made that very apparent, I think, in our industry. And you saw nurses and you saw healthcare workers leaving in droves, because it was a challenging time, but also I think it felt very hopeless because the nature of our industry specifically really is not the fancy, shiny gold coin that people, want to receive. It's usually things people don't want to talk about or want to think about that's going to happen. And if it's going to happen, sometimes the idea is kind of just putting seniors to the side. And so our healthcare system, I would consider it a crisis for senior care right now. And I don't know the answer. I sometimes interject a lot of thoughts, but this would take a lot of time for me to give some thoughts about that. But what I would say is, especially in our rural parts of our state, it's really a troubling time right now. And I think our society as a whole has not been aware to the declining resources for senior care. So you'll see, and you've maybe seen it in the news, probably these last few years, you're seeing a lot of mergers. Even in senior care, you're seeing a lot of communities transferring ownership. Mm-hmm. And that's survival. Yeah. That's just because the resources and the financial ability of a lot of these places has declined dramatically. And COVID was disastrous, I think, for our industry as a whole. I think with not having enough healthcare workers. I'm not sure if people are aware, but our National Guard was out in our senior care facilities providing emergency care.
No, I didn't know that. That's crazy.
In nursing homes, they were throughout the state as caregivers. They got cross-trained to be caregivers because there was none in facilities. And so that was really, really hard. And people received, not because they were in the National Guard, but just in general, there was just a lot of non-consistent staff in a lot of our settings, and we're still in that state. I'm super blessed at Trouvaille that we have not been in that position and needed to use outside resources, but I know that is definitely the minority.
Yeah.
But overall, I would say that The challenge is that because there's a staffing shortage and because how nursing homes get paid by the government, especially in the state of Minnesota, it's a federal funded nursing homes for the most part, or medical assistance,
Yep.
and some private pay. A lot of nursing homes in our state are operating in the red. And that's hard to believe, I know. We anticipate in the next couple of years, a lot more facilities closing.
Yeah. It is especially interesting because when you're talking about it, people know on the whole that like long-term care facilities are very expensive. You know, whether it's national average numbers that you use, I mean, you could spend $8,000, $9,000, $10,000 a month fairly quickly and easily at a skilled nursing facility. What I think a lot of people fail to understand is most of the people that are utilizing those facilities don't have the financial resources to pay. And so to your point, the funding that they are getting is government funding for the most part. And it's just interesting to me that what you're saying is they're operating in the red, that's not enough. There's not a lot of private pay going into those institutions.
Yeah, not into those institutions so much. And even just with how complex and how people are aging and living longer, the needs for people are so much greater than they were and so the complexity you're also seeing. And if people need to get short-term rehab, you would have noticed probably even prior to the pandemic, there were TCU beds or short-term rehab beds across the state, very readily available, good care, great options. You have seen a dramatic shift in that. So people are in the hospital now and they have nowhere to go. They are really stuck about not being able to find a facility. Some are going all the way from the Twin Cities out to St. Cloud. That's where they're saying, well, you have to go there, or on the opposite side of the city, or to a community that families have toured and said, I don't want to send my loved one there. So it's been very, very challenging.
Yeah. Well, for the sake of time, and I just want to give some practical advice to the listeners, because obviously we've talked a lot about the state of care and what's going on and options, which is wonderful. But when do we start looking? You know what I mean? When do we have to start thinking about this? Because you get to see every day people coming in and kind of the beginning of that story for them, or maybe you're the second stop. But for the most part, you get to kind of see these transitions. And one of the things that I told you right when I met you that I would find fascinating is to find out, what would you tell people if you could talk to the masses about, hey, think about these things before you need care? Like, how do you start the process, down the process of preparing for this before it happens? Because we talked about that. And one of the biggest mistakes people make is they wait till they're in crisis and then they start to try to make decisions. And that's really tough to do in any stage of life. The analogy that I used and gave you was, it's like waiting till you get to the stop sign to react to the stop sign. If that's what you do, it's too late, right? You're now going to be in the middle of the intersection before anything can actually happen. And if there's any traffic coming the opposite direction, it's going to be bad. And so with that being said, you had broke it down for me in both kind of the health side of it and then on the money side of it. So let's start with the health side. What are some of the things that people should do prior to needing care on the health side to prepare for this phase of life? Yeah.
And I would say the sooner people get prepared, the better. So I would say there's never an age that's too young to be thinking about this. As soon as you're married and have kids, or if you're an adult and you are in that position to be thinking forward about all of these things that are part of life, which is death and needing care at some point. So I'm going to ask you this question. Does everybody at Trouvaille, are they over the age of 70? Yes, currently they are. Yeah. But we have had people that are under 70 that have had early onset dementia and that have been in their 60s and younger than some of our staff. See, and that's super interesting to me because, again, I feel like there's certain health issues that we think of, okay, that could happen to a younger person, but people with early onset dementia that need skilled care in their 60s or younger than your staff, that's surprising to me. Yeah, and it's more prevalent than you think. I think that typically people are saying, we just retired. I don't know how this could happen. I thought we would have all these years to travel. And so their spouses are trying to navigate something that is well beyond what they would have ever imagined for that period of their life. But so as far as from the health perspective, knowing and having a living will or having looked at an advanced healthcare directive is critical. And I say that really out of compassion for the rest of your family. Yeah. Yep. It's not so much even for you, because at the time that needs to be utilized, you're not in a position to care or think about it. Yep. but your family is put through some really challenging navigation of what to do and potentially having conflict between family members that I don't think anybody wants to put as a burden onto your family in that circumstance. So being prepared for that and knowing what your wishes are, not just about whether you want CPR done or not CPR done, but just the outlook of what is a high quality of life for you and what that looks like. And being able to share that with people and have that written down is so very helpful and so appreciated by family members longer term. And you need to keep thinking about that. You don't just do it once and then not think about it again, because as your life changes, those things and what that quality of life might look like changes too.
Yeah, we deal with estate planning from one side of that coin, if you will, here at Fiat, and we review legal documents from time to time. We're not lawyers. I don't draft these documents and I can't redraft them, but we can look at them and give some thought. And I can't tell you how many times I've opened somebody's will or their trust or whatever, and you look at it and you're like, oh, you have 3 kids. We've never talked about your 3 kids. And they're 17, 19, and 24, huh? And they're like, well, no, they're 37, 39, and 44. It's like, okay, I think we probably need to take a peek at what's under the hood with these legal documents. The example you gave that I thought was great was, I'm 42. The idea of writing down that I'm okay with CPR being performed at 42 years old makes some sense. But if I'm 85 and I've got all these other complex health issues going on, and maybe some chronic issues, maybe that doesn't make sense for me anymore. Because with everything else I got going on in the set of circumstances I have, maybe, a DNR, a do not resuscitate, or CPR, things like that, I'm going to feel differently about it at that time of life.
Absolutely. And I think, again, that question is going to come up to you, but in a crisis. So if you're in the emergency department and they're asking you this question at that point in time, emergency room doctors are there, and they will tell you this. Their role is to save lives. That's what an emergency room is designed for. So they're not going to have in-depth conversations about what the trajectory would be if they went ahead and did CPR or said that they just need it to be able to give a direction.
Yeah.
And so it's not in that setting that's where your best focus on that decision-making comes in.
Quality of life is not part of the decision-making process.
Right.
And so one of the other things you brought up, I thought was a really, really good point, is not just to have the legal documents in place, number one, which would be I would say at a minimum, a will, some sort of will, a healthcare directive, and then a power of attorney.
Yes.
Because obviously you're going to, in these circumstances we keep outlining, you're going to need somebody to help, even the blocking and tackling of paying your bills for you and stuff like that. But then also, and this is actually a mistake that I probably see more often than not, is the specificity inside of these documents. A lot of times people have them, but they're very generic, and so when it comes to like some of these specific questions of like, well, gosh, did they want CPR? Do they want to donate their organs? Do they want private care? Are they okay being in shared facilities? Like that kind of stuff just isn't there. And so really putting specificity to what you want those situations to look like, to your point, and I think it's really well taken, is it's not about you. This is about your family members and not putting them in a spot where they have to make these decisions for you. Because having watched this with my wife's family, it's a difficult position to be in.
Right. And I think, your example was a really good example of how families, it's very hard for families at that point in time to separate their own personal emotions of what they want versus to say what they would want if they were in their shoes, or if they are well aware of what their wishes are. And I think that's what becomes really challenging. And that's where that conflict comes in, because not all family members can take a step back and look objectively when you're in the middle of those situations. And then those decisions impact the next decision and the next decision, and it kind of can just keep rolling down the road.
Well, and the specificity, if it's in the document, forces you to think through it and have a conversation too. I mean, the example I'll give you is my wife and I, we have will, we have trust, we have POAs, healthcare directives, we have all of that stuff. And when you go through the process, it forces you to think through some of these things. And so when my wife and I were talking to the lawyer about our healthcare directive, my wife's background is as a neonatal intensive care nurse. And so not only is she in healthcare, but it's machines,
Yeah.
that are keeping babies alive a lot of the time. So her healthcare director was basically like, yeah, anything at all costs, like whatever you got to do. Then it came to me and it was, something to the effect of, if I'm over the age of 80 and I sprain my ankle, just take me out back. Like I'm good. It was a good run. Didn't expect to make it that long. And needless to say, she was not on board with that. She did not love my decisions, or what I thought were going to be my decisions at the end of life. And so we had to have a meaningful conversation about it and come to a conclusion that we both felt really good about. And had we not had that conversation, and then something would have happened to me and she would have done anything at all costs, and then I lived, you can see how that does. And I would have been like, that's not what I wanted. And I didn't want to go, you know what I mean? Like, it just, don't do that to your loved ones.
Yeah.
Write it down, keep it up to date, and be very specific.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And
it
helps not just, I think it's a peaceful thing and it's a healthy thing.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be a scary, intimidating thing that we try to put out there. It should be beautiful. It should be to say, this is how I want to be cared for. And this is, and for children, adult children or spouses, they want to honor that person the best of their ability.
Yeah.
So it's a beautiful thing. It doesn't have to be this horrible, painful thing.
I agree, but I also get why it is. I mean, because I'm married, you're married. Like, do you talk to your spouse that way on your day to day? Hey, honey, this is how I want to be cared for just today. Okay. Like, we don't do that either.
No,
So
that's true. We got some work to do there too. Yeah.
It is tough, but at least I know we're not having those specific conversations. So I say that a little tongue in cheek, but we do, by the way we act day to day, kind of give off that vibe of, this is how I want to be cared for. But again, at end of life, we lose a lot of that cognitive ability or physical ability to be able to tell people. So let's flip, for the sake of time, to the money side of this. How do we prepare financially for kind of the end of life and the care that might be needed?
Yeah, I think my biggest advice is to just know where you're at with your finances, to have clarity around that, to do the things, if you're in your adult years, to be able to have money put aside, to look at that. But also, again, about that communication piece. If you're in a position where you're getting older or you are elderly and you have not communicated with your kids where your resources are, what your passwords are, how to access your money, any of that kind of stuff, it becomes very, very complicated. And again, it's usually at a stressful time that all of this stuff needs to be figured out, and it's not easy to do. I'd also say that, for people that have a lot of resources or people that have limited amount of resources, especially those individuals really tend to need to kind of have clarity of their expectations and how they're resourcing their money at that point in time, about giving and generosity, but also about what is being gifted within family. Because especially if you have a limited amount of resources and you know that at some point you might be dependent on some government funding, how you give gifts prior to that makes a difference. And it's taken into consideration. So I do often recommend for people to have an elder law attorney involved as they get older, to just clarify those resources, making sure that whatever can be given as gifts, if that's an important part of that journey, that's already kind of clarified, estate planning, and making sure that if having your funeral arrangements taken care of and those sorts of things, so you don't have that burden left for family, is important. Getting those things financially situated in advance is really helpful. But as care, like we said, care in senior living it's expensive. There's no question about it. And it's going to be continuing to get more and more expensive. And there's legislation that's proposed that's going to impact even that going forward, and probably not in a way that's going to make anything even close to just going up incrementally. I anticipate the rise in cost for senior living to be dramatically more expensive, especially as we see these nursing homes and the resources and availability being more tight, and the funding and the way our resources are determined by the state and the federal government is just limited. So you have to be prepared. But when you're going into a senior community, oftentimes, looking out, I have individuals who have lived with us in our memory care for maybe just only 2 months. And I
Yeah.
have people that have lived with us. We've been open 10 years and they've been there since day one and
Wow.
still there 10 years later. So you don't know what that looks like. So being prepared and having really looked at those assets and resources in a forward thinking way, whether or not you have long-term care insurance, whether or not you have maybe in some circumstances separated some funding between spouses or things like that to make sure that if somebody needs care and the other person doesn't, that there's resources available to them
Yeah.
too.
And so that's where your comment around possibly using an elder law attorney can really benefit is for married couple and the positioning or ownership of assets between, spouse A and spouse B. Possibly it could also be gifting and when you gave and how much you gave. And because there are a lot of people that try purposefully to like get rid of assets prior to needing care so that they can get to that government assistance level, things like that. But understanding the ramifications of those decisions and the pros and cons of some of those decisions might really benefit you having somebody there that knows what they're doing and understands the impact of that. And that would be sometimes that does fall on us at Fiat and your advisor, but can also a bigger scope of that is going to probably fall on that elder care attorney that knows the law and knows like, hey, it's a positive to give this away, but the possible negative impact on the back end is ABC. And then you, of course, get to weigh your options there and decide how you want to do that. But point being there, just to kind of wrap all that up is, number one, don't wait till you get to the stop sign, right? Start dealing with this ahead of time. The possible need for an elder care attorney, but then also just having things in order. Yep. And organized, and so that you understand what financial resources you have, what can be committed to that, and then coupling that with the type of care that you want. And you had talked about this earlier, you didn't mention it yet, and so I just want to bring it up, is touring. Like, it's the same thing like when you're in your 40s and you have your fourth kid and you're like, gosh, we need a bigger house. You go figure all that out, like you're touring these homes and trying to figure out what would make sense so that when you need to move, like you know where you're moving to, or what that house needs to do for you and like how it needs to function. The same thought process. Don't wait until you have to go into a facility, go, whether it's just an assisted living facility or it's skilled nursing or whatever it may be, tour them ahead of time, understand what you want, understand how they're licensed, how many times you might have to move, that kind of stuff, and then prepare financially for that all at the same time.
Yeah. I strongly recommend that. I have people come to Trouvaille all of the time and they are in an absolute crisis and they'll say, well, we need to move now.
Yeah.
And I'll say, well, I'm sorry, we have this wait list. And so we don't have any availability now. And then they'll come back and say, please, we've toured these places and we don't want them to go there. And these are our only options. And so I always say, if you think at all that that's a possibility, let's say you have memory loss in your family history or you've noticed some changes in your loved one, it is not too early to start touring places and just getting on a wait list. Most wait lists, you put a deposit down, it's fully refundable. Not all, but most places. Yeah. So that's a strong encouragement. But additionally, I think just even when you get exposed to a varying degree of communities, whether it's whatever the care need, it is really hard to try to convince people that they need care, right? So oftentimes people are just like, I don't want to deal with it. Mom or dad want to stay in this house for, they've been in here for 50 years and they don't want to leave. And so you're trying to acknowledge those wishes until the crisis happens. And so I think, there are a lot of people that can come alongside you. There are people that, for those of us that have been in the industry a long time, somebody's neighbor's neighbor will call me up and ask me questions about what do you think about this or, what would you do in this circumstance? I think just being connected, because when especially if you're an adult child of a senior who needs care, you're oftentimes got children of your own. So you're in this navigating of two different worlds and trying to put all of that together, and it's overwhelming. So I just say, get out there and look at places so you have a comparison to take into consideration.
Yeah. Natalie, this is all awesome. This is such a important topic and just underserved topic as far as like education is concerned. And so I just greatly appreciate you taking the time, because I know you're busy too, because not only are you running your own facility, but you're consulting on other people's facilities and you got your own family. And so it means a lot that you're here. I appreciate you taking the time.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah. So listeners, I'm going to leave you with this. These are your 3 to-dos. Number 1, draft your documents. If you haven't drafted them already, if you have drafted them and they have not been updated since at least 2020, that's the line in the sand I'm going to give you, because the state law has changed twice since then through the Secure Act and the Secure Act 2.0. At least take a peek at it. Okay. And then make sure that it's specific, that specificity that we talked about. It's not just generic, that you've got specific language in there, how you want to be cared for if and when that time comes. So that's number 1, is your documents. Number 2 is the possibility of using an elder law attorney. Just knowing that there's attorneys out there that this is their specialty. It's good to, 1, know that that exists. And then 2, the possibility of talking through with them the ramifications of some of the, the financial decisions that you want to make. And then be proactive. Don't wait till you get to the stop sign. Start planning for this now, and touring facilities, making decisions on the type of facilities you want, the type of care you want, and then communicating that to your loved ones. Obviously, that can be done through legal documents. And I think that's great. At a minimum, make sure that it's in the legal document. But I think, the highest and best use of planning is to then have that conversation personally with the people that you care about, whether that's your spouse, your kids, your friends, or whoever it is that's going to kind of be a part of your life at the end of your life. Giving them the why behind why you did what you did and the decisions that you've made is really going to lend a lot of peace to them and create more clarity or lack of confusion when that time comes. And so done at its highest and best from a planning perspective is not just getting these things done, practically speaking, it's having what I call a family meeting with the people that you care about that are going to be impacted by whether it's the loss of a loved one or it's just the care that they need. So again, Natalie, thank you so much. Listeners, thanks for joining us for another episode of Every Day is Saturday. As always, my name is Brad Gatto. If you want more information on Fiat, you can find all of that at our website. That's fiatwm.com, fiatwm.com. I'm going to give a shameless plug for Natalie and Trouvaille. I've been in multiple care facilities. I had the wonderful opportunity of doing some financial education at Trouvaille 3 or 4 times this last year. It's a beautiful facility. And honestly, it does feel like a home in there. It really does. I was very surprised the first time that I walked in there. It's not just, you hear a lot of people talk about how they just want to make things feel like home, but then it's not. It legit, you've got something special going on there. And so appreciate what you're doing as well. So anyway, find all that information at the website. I will put in the show note links information on Trouvaille if you want more information there. But otherwise, enjoy your day, and we will see all of you next Saturday.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Every Day is Saturday. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Fiat Wealth Management. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.